Today in the bunker, we're going to make a bank suitable for the Wasteland. I bought this kit. It was already assembled and glued together, although certain parts were not, which is kind of a bonus. The fact that it had both of these lights was also a bonus. Usually those are broken or just missing. It's a fairly straightforward kit, like most of the Plasticville ones. I had to remove, there were a couple of supports on the edge that the roof this was glued to, and I had to get in there with a hobby saw and just use kind of the front third of it to saw through that. It didn't take very long, so it's kind of boring to watch, so I didn't bother to video it. But we're going to clean this up a bit, put a floor in it, and add some details. Also, we're going to figure out what to do with this part. I'm going to maybe try to magnetize that. We'll see. To make the floor, we're just going to use some chipboard. We're going to trace that out. Try to square it up as much as you can. For that, I try to use the factory cut edges. Now, one thing you have to decide, these walls are a little bent, which is also pretty typical of these old plastic buildings. You can straighten them out. I may try to glue that down with hot glue so that it will actually hold it and straighten it out when we put that together. But for right now, I'm going to mark out the four corners and then we'll try to square it up. So using our trusty razor knife, our hobby knife, and a ruler, a steel one, we went ahead and cut out this piece of chipboard, and I'm waiting for the glue gun to heat up. And what I'm going to do is lay a bead of glue along this edge, and then I will bend this wall out slightly as I put it in that glue, and once that sets, that should hold it, and we'll try to square it off of that. And for this, I'm using actual high temp hot glue. You could use the low temp stuff too. It should be fine. All right, it's not perfect, but it will certainly do, especially for a ruined building in the Wasteland. Not a problem. Same thing with one of the reasons people don't like to buy these buildings sometimes that are already glued is because for some reason, when people glued them back in the day, they didn't completely squeeze them together. I don't understand that, but whatever. I guess it's just close enough to slap on the table. But for a ruined building, not a big deal. Real buildings will shift and kind of come apart anyway a little bit. So you could fill that if you wanted to, or you can just leave it. I'm going to leave it. That'll kind of add to the somewhat decrepit look. I am going to tighten up some of the joints in a couple of places to make sure the roof still fits. And then we will, later on, we'll also make another sign for this too. So, and then the doors, last time we painted these to look like metal. We're going to go back to the tried and true safety glass with the mesh behind it. So we'll cover that in just a little bit. Now that the glue has had a chance to set up, this is on there pretty firmly. It's definitely not just going to fly off of there. So optional, you could trim that excess. I will probably just paint that black and leave it just so it kind of helps it blend a little bit with the table. But either way, correct answer. So what we're going to do is drill this out and see if we can't figure out how to magnetize these. To drill this, I'm just going to use a pin vise, and we'll just drill that out. We'll start small and get larger as we need, and set about clearing out that hole. Wasn't able to locate my magnets. Big surprise there. Not really. So I took some of the sprue from our previous build, and like I said, this stuff is really useful. It's a nice diameter. And I just cut a small piece off and replaced the broken off tab on this awning. So we're going to let that firm up, and then we'll do some final fitting on that. While we're waiting for those joins to set up, I'm going to go ahead and use, basically matchsticks is what these are, and build a frame for our new sign around this one. I'm just going to super glue these on here and fit them as best I can. And there's our new sign frame. We just, doesn't have to be exact. It's not rocket surgery. And our shade here we got that to where that fits well. I'm sure that'll get broken off at some point especially if you transport it like that. That's why I didn't glue it. It's much better to magnetize it. Wish I could find the magnets. We'll deal with it later. We're going to put some mesh in here in the window. Maybe I could show you on the camera. Also, there's always a little slot in the back of these Plasticville buildings to run a wire for a light bulb, and I always cover those over, or almost always. And then we're going to go ahead and get ready to do the front doors and get those prepped. I cut a piece of this mesh and then oriented it so that it's like diamonds and not squares. You could do it either way. And what I'm going to do is just put a coating of PVA on the back side of this door. I'm going to lay it on here oriented the way I want it. Then I'm just going to let it sit for a while and dry, and then when that's dry we will trim off the excess. Here's our PVA on the back side of that. We're just going to take our mesh, orient that. Well, maybe if I do it up here where you can see it, take our mesh and orient that as best you can, and then press it down into that PVA. You don't have to exert a lot of pressure, just enough to get it down in there so it grabs it. And that's all there is to it. Just let that dry. It'll probably take about an hour or so to be fully dry, and then we'll flip it over, trim it, and then we can put it in when we feel like it. In the meantime, we're going to dress up these awnings a little bit and make them look like they have canvas on them and not just metal. And what we're going to use is some Kleenex or generic facial tissue that doesn't have any design on it. And we're going to put some PVA on here, lay this on it, all that good stuff. This is going to be like when we did the earlier build of the boxes under canvas, the large pallets. So I'm going to set that up, and then I'll show you what we do. All right, to prepare, I've just laid bead of PVA all over this, and now I'm going to smooth it out. It doesn't have to be super great, super smooth. I mean, this is for the Wasteland after all. But I'm going to get these edges so we can fold it down over it. Okay, and then we'll take our tissue and just sort of lay that on there like that. Don't glue it to your hand. Don't ask me how I know to tell you that. All right, and once that firms up a little bit, we'll come back with some diluted PVA and paint that on here, and that will firm up the whole thing. That'll make it all grab. Now that the bottom layer is firmed up pretty well, I took some PVA and thinned it out with some water. We're just going to take a pipette and just apply this. And you could brush it on if you don't have pipettes. And we'll do that and coat it, and then we'll let that firm up again before we try to trim the rest of it. This tissue paper tears very, very easily, so you want to make sure that everything is good and firm before you attempt to cut it. While I was waiting for the tissues to dry, I went ahead and cut a piece of that window mesh. I don't know if you can see it in this light, and just glued that in the teller window there for the drive-through. And I just used PVA on the back. You could use super glue, whatever. It's not really going to have any pressure against it. And while we're waiting for everything to dry, I'm going to round up some clear plastic clamshell packaging or similar, just that clear plastic that you use for different retail packages. And we're going to start cutting out some windows to add to the building. The skylight has the same pebbled texture as the roof, which I thought to be odd because generally glass windows don't have that sort of texture. So I just added some more of the tissue and the glue. We're going to do the same thing we did with the awnings and make that look like canvas. We'll probably lay some boards on here, maybe some rocks, show that it's weighted down. These bits that we added for the canvas were taking forever to dry, so I went ahead and used a heat gun on low setting just to speed that process up a little bit. So I'm going to get ready and prime this building, and we'll see what those come out like. So here it is with some primer. I just used some black. That didn't work so well. I ended up hitting it overall with just a gray automotive primer, and even that can's dying, but it was enough to get the job done. So we're going to pick out the windows in like a gunmetal, and we'll rust those. We're going to do the stonework in a fairly dark gray, and then probably a white or a tan or some combination of it on the walls. And then we'll pick out the individual details, the alarm and the steel bars, handles on the door, all that good stuff. You can kind of see our safety glass effect we got there. So that came out pretty good. Same thing with the drive-through. Not too bad. We'll paint that a metal with some rust. And then we'll set about making our sign. And the roof we're going to do dark, and then we'll dry brush it so it looks like gravel. So let's put some paint on it and see what we get. Here's the bank with a little bit of paint on it. I just used some tan color on the concrete areas. The stone is all dark gray, light gray. Then I went back, and this time I used an airbrush just to try it, and I really like the technique, but you could do it with a brush. I just applied various washes, light, dark, mid-brown, army painter, strong tone kind of stuff, just to weather it. And then I also went, and I have a little die that cuts out leaves. So I did that a while back. I made a bunch of fall color leaves. So I just randomly glued some of those on. I got that die over, it's from Green Stuff World. Even though I don't like buying things from them, it's actually a pretty good tool. And then I added a few tufts, just a couple, kind of highlight the fact that, you know, it's a long abandoned or long mistreated building. And overall, I'm pretty happy with how it came out. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope that this inspires you to make something awesome, and I hope you have a fantastic day.